think so, yeah. Yeah. Do you want to hit number 2? Is it number 2 that we use?
I think so, yes. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, hello everybody. As Dave said, I'm Simon Lewis. I'm a partner in the construction team at Dickinson Lees, who are a law firm down on the quayside. I'm the head of the construction team, and I'm interested in the legal issues that surround BIM and its introduction. And what I'd like to do in this lecture is to talk through some of those issues from quite a practical point of view, and to try and go through some of the concepts that flow out of the introduction of BIM. If you've got any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm quite happy to take questions as we go along. Otherwise it gets a bit boring if it's just me droning on at you for about 45-50 minutes or so. First of all, to try and put it into context a bit, then we'll go into what I'm going to talk about. The context, as you'll know, is that there's an increasing use of BIM across all construction sectors. As gradually its use begins to settle into the UK market, an increasing awareness of what it means and its implications. The various studies that I'm sure you'll see and show an increasingly large number of people, first of all, understand what it means, secondly, understand what its implications are for the construction sector, and that they're going to have to get used to using it, because it's going to be quite a central part of not only the domestic, but importantly international construction practice. It is already, and we need to get used to it here in the UK. The springboard for the current developments in BIM is the Working Party strategy paper. The government has set up a working party to look at BIM as part of its overall strategy to reduce costs in the construction sector. And the working party came up with a target to which we are now all working, which is that suppliers to the government estate are to operate at level 2 by 2016. Now, the idea behind this particular strand of the strategy is that, as with all innovations in construction, or very largely most of them, they have to be pushed by the client. It's the client that leads the way by stressing what it wants from its suppliers. The government is the biggest client to the construction sector, so it makes sense that it's the government that says, right, we want you all to be operating at a particular level by 2016, level 2, which I'm sure you're all aware of what that means. And much of what I'm going to talk about is about level 2, because a lot of the legal issues that we're looking at the moment really arise in the context of the structure of level 2. And as you'll see when we get to the end of the talk, by the time we get to level 3, or when we get there, a lot of these things actually have to be discarded, because we're in a completely different place when we get to level 3. So where we are now is essentially the legal issues arising from the use of federated models, and as you'll see, this is characterized by quite a careful ring fencing of liabilities and so on and so forth, as the process gets integrated into existing contractual structures. When we get to level 3, we'll be looking at a whole new way of drafting contracts to deal with how level 3 works. As we've gone on over the last 12 months, 18 months, we've seen a lot of sector-specific developments, and then now specific working groups dealing with things like SMEs, small to medium enterprises, retail sector, transport, supply side, all sorts of specific groups looking at how BIM feeds into the overall process. You can see them all if you look on the BIM task group website. It's quite useful. It sets out all the various interest groups there. So what's going to happen next? Well, the Working Party report set out a number of work streams that are being developed. The main one I want to look at, because it's the one that really highlights the contractual and legal issues, is the development of something called the BIM protocol. I'm going to explain what it looks like. Quite a useful way to do this is to look at what's been going on in the US, because they are slightly ahead of us in terms of developing the contractual structures, although we're catching up. I'll look at a couple of specific legal and contractual issues, then I'll finish off just by quickly looking ahead to what happens next. As I say, this therefore really is examining the sort of level 2 sort of scenario, which is where we are. There are some large clients in this country that are edging their way towards level 3, but equally there are some that haven't even got much past level 1, which is almost not using BIM at all. So we have a very wide range of positions within the construction sector in this country, and the idea is to try and get them to more or less, maybe narrow, should we say, the range of positions that they're in by 2016. But the government sees this as very much not a goal in itself, but simply an endpoint. In fact, the evangelists like Mark Bew, who's the head of the task group, actually sees 2016 as no more than the point at which the construction sector is using the information it's already got properly, which is what it should be doing now. So he sort of sees it as, well, we're not really doing very much more than getting to where we should be now in terms of our information use, and that's when we start to move forward. So, you know, see that as you will, really. So, oops, let me try it again, there we go. What I'm going to do quickly then is to have a quick look at the US approach, because this will hopefully explain to you how the thing is structured in terms of the various documents. And as you'll see, this feeds into the way that the documents are being developed in this country. The first one of these, and this is probably one of the older ones now, a couple of years old, is the consensus docs, BIM addendum. Consensus docs is a joint body of a number of construction sector bodies in America, and it produced this thing, 301 BIM addendum, which, as the name suggests, is something that goes into or is added to a construction contract. Its main features are, first of all, it doesn't require a revamping or a restructuring of contractual arrangements. It's something that's added on. And a point to emphasize in terms of the legal issues that are raised by level 2 is that they don't actually come up with anything new. They haven't come up with new legal concepts that we're all wrestling with. They tend to emphasize certain issues, as you will see, that have to be addressed carefully, but we're not looking at a huge wholesale reorganization of the legal issues. That's going to come when we get to level 3, which is going to require very significant cultural change, I think. Level 2 requires a bit of a change in approach, but certainly legally it's not going out there and doing something completely new. So the BIM addendum, it's something that you add on to the existing contract. You don't have to restructure the contract itself. It's what I call a horizontal contractual arrangement, by which I mean everyone involved in the project who are otherwise on a vertical, in the usual vertical arrangement with the employer at the top and the contractor, then subcontractors and suppliers, they all sign up to the BIM addendum, so they're all in it together. The central document is something called the BIM execution plan, which, as you might have gathered, is really something that sets out how the BIM process is going to be carried out in the context of this project. As you can see, it's to be agreed within 30 days of the execution of the contract between the owner, as they call them, the architect or engineer. So it comes in really early on. That's the point. It's early involvement. As you will see, actually, if you follow through the BIM process, what this does, what this has the effect of doing, is to actually make the industry work in a way that those who wanted to reform the industry, in this country at least, have been trying to do for about 20 or 30 years. Much more collaborative working together, early contractor involvement, early involvement of those with a design input, rather than leaving it all until the last minute. Because really underlying all of this, and it's a phrase you may have come across already, is BIM enables you to build the whole project twice. You do it first time virtually, and then you do it for real. And the benefit of doing it virtually is, yeah.
You know just going on there twice, really. Do you not think it should be more than twice?
Well, it could be.
just putting it out there, you know. It's
what I mean. I suppose
it's there to be perfected, isn't it? So
yeah, it's there to be perfected. I suppose what that really means is you build the thing virtually first of all. You go through those design changes and iterations in the virtual model, so you don't have to do them in the real world.
Yeah, it's the issue I've got with the Reebok line works. It's standard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. No, I mean, it's true. And actually, I wonder, particularly when we get to level 3, whether a lot of that's going to have to be redone as well. Because it is very, again, because it is very traditional. I mean, I know they've only just managed to get it sorted now, and they're going to have to go. They will have to go and do it again when we get to level 3, because it is too traditionally based. And bringing people on early is the whole point about this. Try to get the thing built, as it were, work your way through the clashes and the variations and the design changes in the virtual world, so you don't have to do it when you actually put, put bricks and mortar on the ground. We'll see. It should work. The statistics from the US indicate that it does massively cut down design changes and variations during the build phase, and that's where all the money comes. Hence, that's the cost-saving logic. We're not having to do it while we are actually there on the ground. We are saving costs by getting all these things out of the way first. So, hence, the document is executed early on. This is a common feature, as you will see. Involves everybody, and it requires the employment of this person called the BIM information manager, model manager, various names for this person, who is charged with running the BIM element of the project. Paid for by the owner, you will see in this particular case. Often I suppose one can see whether this is going to be another person or a role taken on by an existing participant in the process remains to be seen. I'd rather hope it's the latter, because we don't need another person on the job. We need somebody else to actually assume this role, and I think what we will find is that exactly who it is will change as we go through the project. I think it's likely that early on it will be the architect, and as you will see when we look at the State of Ohio protocol, it is the architect early on. It might well then become the contractor as we go into the construction phase. Obviously, it probably won't be either of them when you get to the FM or maintenance phase, the post-build phase, which is where in fact this is of its most importance, I think, in one sense, and will apply most maintenance of the asset. It's going to be somebody else.
Simon?
Yeah.
Just on that point, do you think this is a role that's going to be about forever, or do you think when BIM becomes business as usual, there will be no need for an individual role, or do you think that there always needs to be that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there will always be an element of it. It might be one that will be absorbed into existing job descriptions.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. I mean, I think probably the emphasis on it now is obviously because it's so new. But it's interesting that, again, as we'll come on to, owners are not expecting the basic BIM duties, certainly level 2, to incur any additional fee. They won't pay any more money for doing the job, which is something that I know I've had a lot of griping at when I've done workshops on this. People are going, well, there's all this extra work, and importantly, there's all this extra liability, but we're not being paid for it.
The argument I would suggest is that the information is then managed. If it's managed correctly, you're saving costs in the long run.
Oh yeah, you are. Yeah.
So
yeah.
It all creates work now.
Yeah. That's the selling. That's the way it's sold.
Do it.
Yeah. I mean, that's the way that the inevitable objection you get is, it's understandable, particularly when you're looking at small, let's say, architects firms that can see themselves as being the primary fulfillers of the BIM information manager role. Is, well, hang on a minute, we've got to spend money on getting new software, we've got to spend money on training up people to be BIM information managers. It's going to cost us a lot of money. We don't get paid any more money by the employer for doing this job, because the employers think that it's something we should be doing anyway. You know, how do we win in all of this? Very often that's something that you see them saying, and the selling point in response is actually two things. First of all, it makes the job more efficient, and it makes the job therefore more profitable for you in the long run. And secondly, to be brutal about it, this is the new normal. You're going to have to do this, because if you don't, you won't be working for the government anymore, And very soon you probably won't be working for most of your major employers because they will all want this. So you've got to do it.
Forgive me if it's consensus docs going crazy, but is that not just the same as the BIM champion? In the sense that they're information managers?
Yeah, I suppose to you can call it what you. It doesn't matter what you call it.
It's arbitrary. It's convention.
It doesn't matter what you call it. It's a role. It's a function. As you see, it's called the model manager in another protocol.
Yeah.
It's just a question of what you would like to call it. But that's a function that is now part of the landscape, one way or the other. Yeah.
Do you think that it is, as you said, it's more burden on the actual firm? Probably that is the reason why they say that the BIM manager should be paid by the owner. But it's also in the owner's interest that he employs him, isn't it? So that he has a person who is well informed about the whole structure,
Yes.
who can guide him through the process and make sure that he gets the maximum value, right?
Yes, I think that's right. I mean, it's a question of where you. It's a client-driven thing, and it would make sense that the employer is the one who bears the cost of doing this at this stage, because that's the way if you like, the obligations flow down. So yeah, I mean, I think it's logical that it would be the employer who
If
would
it's
do it.
a contractor or the architect who is employing him,
Yeah.
there is less chance for the client to get the best out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly at the commencement of the project, that you would expect that it would be somebody like the architect and that they would be aligned with the employer's position. As I say, I think you find, whilst the BIM information manager is, at least at this stage, while we're at level 2, is paid for by the owner. It may well change that the BIM information manager becomes the contractor when you get to the build phase. It may still therefore be paid by the owner, obviously. But it would make sense to put, as it were, this particular obligation in with the owner's, in the owner's pot, if you like, because in the same way that he's employing others, he is the one who is ultimately getting the benefit of the facility, therefore gets the benefit of the cost saving and so on that comes out of BIM. So it makes sense, I agree.
Because especially in the Middle East, they are starting to employ BIM managers for most of the project because they think that otherwise the architect or the contractor might trick them.
Right. Like, good to see everyone trusts everybody in this process. That's excellent. Construction sector's living up to its reputation.
You know, with the nature of contract, do you think that with BIM level 3 the memorandum of understanding would be used probably at the start to commence that?
I think when we get to level 3, particularly early on, there's going to have to be a lot of rethinking about the way that the contract works.
Yeah.
It's my last slide, but when we get to it, we're going to be looking at alliancing type agreements and partnering type arrangements, more like alliancing, I would have thought. And we will be looking at how you record and deal with what will be real-time interactions with a single model, where the idea of trying to define the scope of people's liability has to go out the window.
Project.
Yeah, we're looking at project insurance, we're looking at project bank accounts, we're looking at edging towards a much more alliancing type, almost virtual company type arrangement. It isn't a virtual company that's close. Insurance becomes crucial to that, as we'll come on to. But yeah, I mean, things will look very different as when we get there. The consensus docs approach is sort of setting out the features that you'll see come up over and over again. Mention here that this is one of the little legal tweaks that lawyers like to talk about, is the model a contract document or not? Early on, certainly in the US, it didn't have to be a contract document. It was just used for information, if you like, as a way of providing more information and detail. I think that as it goes on, it will be a contract document. It's much more likely to be, and it's more or less taken in the later developments that we'll see that it is a contract document. So consensus doc says you can do either, as you'll see the more recent developments take it as given that in fact it is. So there's obviously a reliance issue there. It's going to be capable of being relied upon the same way as any other contract document. So the BIM execution plan, this is more or less what it sets out. Contract information, obviously, what models are to be created, and what you use them for, and who creates them. So this is anticipating what's called the federated model approach. That is a level 2 characteristic, where you don't have a single model. You have a series of models created by each of the participants that are linked in with each other electronically. Exactly how you link them in and how these work and talk to each other gives rise to the interoperability issues, which I'm sure you've heard about, and I'm not going to say anything about because that's all techie stuff, which I don't understand. But basically, a series of linked models. Don't forget, a model, of course, can be a 3D virtual model, or it could be a spreadsheet, because this is information. It's not necessarily just visual. So bear the information point in mind. So these models are linked. How are they linked? Who's responsible for them? Do some or all of them constitute contract documents? And then various areas, spatial portions, various other characteristics, what we expect the content to be, and importantly here, the required level of detail at various project milestones. Here again is a characteristic you will see is very important in terms of the way this is structured. This is a process which develops in time. We start at a certain point, obviously, at a very broad point, and you'll see this in a bit more detail in a minute. A very high level. As we go on, the detail builds up. And you need to know at any particular point in this process who is responsible for what. And that, if you like, in one sense, is the crux of the legal and contractual structure here. Who is responsible for what, when. Each and every party needs to know essentially what they're putting into this process at any given time and what they expect to get out and the extent to which they can rely on it. And that, if you like, really is the basis of the approach of all of these things. Here's a bit more of what's in it. I'm not going to go through all of this. In that, I think you should have this handout available to you. If not, badger Dave and he'll give it to you. But this just sets out the characteristics of the consensus docs in addendum. Moving on to the other main American early document, the AIA, American Institute of Architects, BIM Protocol Exhibit, again something to be added on to the contract. This is important because what this does is it actually goes into that who does what when in more detail, and it separates out the processes into levels of development, and I'll explain these in a minute, and then reliance on that level for each model element. So we look at a particular part of the model, we look at each element, we look at a level of development at a particular period of time, and they provide specific content. So they get increasingly detailed. Again, it's a federated model approach. But what you get, of course, when you have model elements and levels of development is you get a table. You get the tabular approach. And that is a characteristic of all the UK developments. We're going down the tabular approach system. Very sensible. It makes it much easier to understand where you are at any particular point in time. You then define the responsibility for each model element author, and you basically say you are allowed to rely on what is put into the model to the specific level in each level of development. Consensus docs deals with this by allowing each participant to specify exactly what they are putting in and the extent to which you rely on it. This is a slightly more comprehensible thing, I think, or slightly better developed, because it sets out the framework that everyone can buy into. You can see at any particular point what you are putting in and the extent to which you can rely on it. It's another horizontal arrangement, as I say. So how do these levels of development pan out? There are 5 of them, which are referred to as 100 to 500. I don't know why they couldn't do 1 to 5. I don't know. It's Americans, I suppose. It's got to be bigger than just 1 to 5. It's 100 to 500. 100 starts at the overall building massing level. Then we work our way through, as you can see, as you gradually put in the various systems, then specific assemblies, then you make these more accurate, you begin to fit them into the overall project, fabrication, assembly and detailing information and so on, and then we get to 500, which is as constructed. That is the point at which the thing is finished. Everything is in place. It's accurate in terms of size, shape, location, quantity and orientation. This is the point at which you can hand it all over to the company that is going to look after this once it's built. This is, if you like, your O&M manual's point, except that you don't have to have an O&M manual because you've got the BIM model now instead. So the AIA approach, the tabular approach, is to look at these levels to say at any particular point in time you are responsible for this level of development, and the parties can rely upon what you are putting in to that level of development and no further. Should you, for some reason, put in more information than you have to at any particular level, the other parties cannot rely on it. Why you would do that, I've no idea. You wouldn't, would you? You would put it into exactly the level you need and no further. There you are. It fits in with the limitation of liability structure that I'll explain in a little more detail shortly. Basically, the extent to which you take on the risk or the liability for the information you put in is very strictly modelled. It's all about certainty. It's all about knowing what you have to put in, when, and everyone else knows what they'll get from you at any particular point in time. And as you will see, the points in time at which this information is taken out of the development of the model are also fixed by reference to information drops, which are related to something called COBE, which you'll, yes, good, somebody nodded, excellent, you know what COBE is. So you can see how that is if you like, a time-related structure that fits into this contractual matrix that we're looking at here. So how does it work? Those are the two that were the older ones. Just by way of example, the state of Ohio, which I came across on the web, has got a BIM protocol which it uses for its projects. So just to give you a worked example, how does the state of Ohio do it? Well, it's got a model manager. This is our BIM information manager. It assumes that this will be the architect, at least through the design and construction phases. I wonder whether it might be the contractor. I'm not entirely sure. Certainly at the construction phase, it depends. It does 4 model development categories, and then it uses the AIA LODs to come up with its table. Again, expects the BIM execution plan to be signed up very early on. Assumes that the use of BIM on a project should not result in increased fees, just takes that as read, interestingly enough. And as I say, that does actually reflect the findings that the NBS survey came up with in March 2011. I can't imagine that there's been a change of heart there, probably quite the opposite. So interesting to see that it's feeding through the basic structure, as I say. And I'll come back to the Ohio BIM protocol later on when we look at specific issues. I won't go through this, but the Penn State Project Execution Planning Guide also sets out what it expects to see in a BIM execution plan.
Do you find that quite convoluted?
What is?
In the sense that the Penn State,
yeah.
Do you find it quite...
Do I find it quite... It's detailed.
Yes.
It's very detailed.
Yeah.
It's I don't know, 300 pages long. This one is.
Yeah, it's not open to conjecture or anything. Well, they are open to conjecture. Sorry, it's not open to customization.
No, I mean it's a very good and very detailed review of every possible aspect. And there are I mean this is the project execution planning one. There's one for FM. There's one for maintenance. Well, in fact, there are lots of them. If you've ever had a look on the Penn State site, there's a huge number of these guides. And I haven't gone into detail in one sense because that would take up several hours on its own. But it is a useful summary of a lot of thinking that's been done at Penn State. But it is it's full and detailed. I think this is fair.
Yeah, I would say that the wording of certain uses and terminologies were quite, well, they were Americanized obviously, but
yeah.
they're different to the conventions that are used
Yeah, I mean, it's the US way of approaching it, and it's a lot of the groundwork was done here in terms of what you would expect, sort of features that you would expect to find in execution plans, without necessarily then being taken wholesale through to the UK, which obviously has its own terminology and its own structure, as we'll come on to. Yeah, but if you want to read a detail, it's pretty detailed and pretty impressive in terms of leading the way, but the UK has, as we'll see, adopted some of it, but not all of it. There are two principal things to look at, I think, in the UK. One is the CIC model, the draft BIM protocol, which is out, and I believe should be coming out by the end of this week in a revised format, so have a look at the BIM, or keep your eye on the BIM Task Group website for that. It does adopt the basic structure, as I've been explaining, levels of BIM maturity, standards and classifications of what goes in at what stage, project stages, and then the BIM-enabled information drops. This is the COBE UK information drops, which feed into the BIM model structure. It sets out the model objects, their configuration, and their definition. And then it includes the information manager and various others: design manager, model content originator, authorized content user. In other words, it comes up with its own terminology for the various participants in the process, as you would expect. In terms of the BIM-enabled information requirements, again, it does the same approach, the tabular type approach, the LODs. It sets out the formats and exchange standards to be used in terms of the interoperability issues, and again defines who can provide what and when. So it's what I call the ring fencing of liability and design risk, which follows through, uses the tabular approach. No real surprises in one sense once you've seen the way it's been developing in America. The CIC approach takes much the same